The National Security Study Memorandum 200, NSSM 200, authored by Henry Kissinger in 1974 during the Nixon administration and later adopted as U.S. policy under President Gerald Ford, is a document that outlines U.S. strategies concerning population growth in developing countries. The memorandum reflects a specific concern: the potential impact of rapid population growth in developing nations on U.S. economic, geopolitical, and security interests.
NSSM 200 was written up by the National Security Council, the highest decision-making body on foreign policy in the United States, to establish official population policy for our country. It was a classified document, top secret, written in 1974. It was only declassified in 1989. So people didn't know about it until just a few years ago, 16, 17 years ago.
While the memorandum doesn't explicitly advocate for war or famine, it connects population growth to broader issues of resource allocation, political stability, and access to critical minerals and energy, especially in resource-rich regions like Africa, Latin America, and Asia.
Population was always one of these phantoms that lurked, kind of hovered in the rafters over a lot of policy deliberations. Oh my God, the rest of the world, which is mostly non-white, is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. What are we going to do about this?
It sounds racist.
It's racist, but it was never, it was implicitly racist, but it was explicitly cast in terms of the stability of these societies.
Outline of key points from NSSM 200 and its impact on U.S. interests.
We see Africa as a threat because in 30 to 40 years, the average African will be 31 years old. The average European will be 52 years old. The average American will be 45 years old. And so what we have here is a very young and vigorous continent with lots of natural resources, and the United States sees this as a direct and proximate threat to our world domination in the future.
Main objectives of NSSM 200, population control as a strategy. NSSM 200 presents population growth in developing countries as a direct threat to U.S. economic interests, global stability, and geopolitical power. It emphasizes the need for population control measures, such as promoting birth control, family planning, and in some cases, abortion, to reduce population growth.
The following is conversation 9-19.
Those that vote for abortion will vote for it because they think what's going to be aborted generally are the little black sections.
Well, I'm surprised by Nixon talking about the legalization of abortion in such clinical terms and such political terms, because I always thought that he was pro-life and against abortion. So it shows you that even presidents of the United States can put on one public face, and on the other hand, behind the scenes, they've been agitating towards something that's entirely opposite to what they say in public.
Nixon referred to aborted black fetuses as, quote, the little black bastards. Surprised?
No.
That's the way he thought.
I think it's fair to say that and I don't know the subsequent American politicians as well as these two, but I think both Johnson and Nixon, Johnson once, when I was in his office, called up Nick Katzenbach, the undersecretary. He'd just seen a TV thing about starving babies in Biafra, and he called him up and he said, "Nick, we got to do more to get these little starving nigger babies off my TV screen."
resource security. The memorandum underscores concerns about the U.S. access to critical resources like oil, minerals, and agricultural products. Countries with high population growth were seen as potential hotspots for instability, which could threaten U.S. access to these resources. Strategic countries. The document focuses on countries in Africa, like Nigeria, Latin America, such as Brazil and Venezuela, and Asia, including India and Pakistan, where U.S. economic and strategic interests might be compromised due to the pressures of rapid population growth.
Let me just indicate that in 1975, we had one sterilization service site for every 23,000 married couples of reproductive age. At the end of this calendar year, 1978, that is going to be changed to one for every 5,300. In other words, the task has just about been completed and to provide easy access to sterilization services throughout the country.
Population control and its tools, promoting birth control and family planning. NSSM 200 advocates the use of foreign aid and collaboration with international organizations such as WHO and UNFPA to promote contraception, family planning, and population control. The U.S. would tie foreign assistance to the adoption of population control measures in these countries. Economic leverage. The memorandum suggests that the U.S. can use economic assistance as a tool to influence population policies in developing nations.
We knew very good and well what happened. We had this long-term strategic interest in Liberia, such as it was. We had a listening post. We had overflight rights that were important for various covert operations in Africa, refueling rights at Monrovia, which were important for the Navy, and of course this huge Firestone interest in rubber. All of that would buy automatically our silence or our acquiescence, and there was the assumption, that we'd owned every government up to that point. We were going to own every government from there on.
Foreign aid, development programs, and financial support from institutions like the World Bank and the IMF are part of the U.S. strategy to control population growth.
So can we talk about, Gates's work in that regard along all those lenses? What has it actually even accomplished? What are we really talking about here? And how does it affect the capacity of the continent to govern itself?
Oh, yeah, right on. So that really does get to the core of this issue. When we look at these foundations in the developing world, what we used to call the third world, Latin America, Africa, South Asia, broadly speaking. It's interesting because it's true. Like these foundations go there, and our governments too give these aid programs that they're very proud of to help these countries develop. Go through economic development so they're less poor, get industrialized, and have big middle classes like the developed world is the idea. Take a look at these countries. The amounts we give in aid, whether through foundations or through government spending, are pretty modest when you look at the scale of these countries' debt service. A lot of people don't realize this, but these countries that are the poorest in the world are some of the most heavily indebted countries in the world. And in particular, they owe their debt to entities outside of their national economies, to their bondholders, who are often, big investment vehicles or investment banks in London and New York, who hold their bond, their country's debts. And what people don't realize is this is what we call neo-colonialism. These poor countries, back in 2010, I believe, the World Bank put the total debt, the outside debt of the developing world at $4 trillion. When you compare it to the size of these countries' smaller economies, is pretty stunning. So even though several $100 million may flow from the European Union and USAID and foundation programs to the developing world. Far larger amounts leave the developing world in the form of budget lines that are to pay the IMF, which is dictating their economic policy in order to sustain their access to credit markets.
On military coercion. While the document doesn't promote war or direct conflict, it emphasizes non-military means to shape population policy. This includes using economic pressure and multilateral organizations to guide population policies in favor of U.S. interests. Impact on U.S. geopolitical and economic interests, maintaining access to resources. One of the primary reasons the U.S. was concerned about population growth in developing countries is its potential impact on resource security.
They are an undisciplined, ragtag army, many little more than boys.
Gangs of armed thugs have hampered relief efforts to such a degree that the U.S. has been forced to change its mind.
Pitted against Taylor is a West African peacekeeping force which supports the government and is funded in part with American money.
When you see these kids fighting, 12, 13, 14-year-old children in rags, but with sophisticated, expensive arms, it never occurs to Americans to ask what they're not told in the news report. Where do these weapons come from?
If population growth led to instability, resource extraction, particularly in regions like Africa with large reserves of oil, minerals, and other critical commodities, could be disrupted. Geopolitical stability, the U.S. viewed high population growth as a potential cause of political instability, which could lead to the rise of anti-American governments or the spread of ideologies like communism that threatened U.S. global dominance during the Cold War era. Limiting Soviet and communist influence, NSSM 200 was created in the context of the Cold War.
I said assisted genocide. We can no longer go into a country and take it over with guns and bombs and tanks and planes. That would be condemned by the world. But instead, we allow the people to kill themselves. And this is why I call it assisted genocide or assisted self-genocide. It's like assisted suicide. You can't kill a person directly, but you assist them in killing themselves. We're doing this on a vast scale to entire countries and continents today.
The U.S. was concerned that if rapid population growth in the developing world led to instability, it could provide fertile ground for communist insurgencies or Soviet influence.
Why did we increase arms sales to Black Africa?
You know, at any given moment, although arms sales, you would think, fall into a kind of moral and ethical and strategic category. At any given moment, it's the result of a myriad of motives. I mean, it's certainly commercial. You are looking to influence the military in these given societies, and you pointed out earlier what happened in most of these cultures was that the intellectual elite at one time or another was butchered, was eliminated.
Population control was viewed as a way to preempt such threats.
The military.
We've got so much blood on American hands. The U.S. is the leading arms supplier to these thugs in the bush in these countries who use children as war fodder.
The role of international organizations cannot be understated. The United States has historically used international financial institutions such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, as tools to exert influence over developing countries. In the context of NSSM 200, these institutions were seen as key mechanisms for promoting population control policies. By attaching economic assistance or debt relief to population management goals, the U.S. could shape the internal policies of resource-rich developing nations. Furthermore, the U.S. worked with organizations like the World Health Organization, commonly known as WHO, and the United Nations Population Fund, or UNFPA, to distribute contraception and promote family planning in developing countries. These international bodies allowed the U.S. to pursue population control without being directly tied to the efforts, thereby mitigating the appearance of neocolonialism or overt interference.
The news report, where do these weapons come from?
When the tribes objected and the companies lost money, Bismarck sent an imperial commissioner. His first job was to persuade the African chiefs to accept the so-called protection of Germany. The commissioner was named Goering, and his son would one day become notorious as the number 2 man in the Nazi Reich. The technique of persuasion was simple. When 2 tribes were hostile to each other, both would be offered military support. As the governor put it, the German policy was to influence the natives to kill each other for us.
When it comes to protecting its interests, military actions are always on the table. While NSSM 200 does not advocate for military action, history demonstrates that the U.S. has been willing to use military force when its economic and geopolitical interests are at stake.
The coup, if sanctioned by a foreign government, is cold-blooded murder in the name of we want what you have.
Always. Always.
And you're saying that the vast majority we either knew about, sanctioned, or engineered.
Or participated in.
It's been a pleasure to welcome Liberian Head of State Samuel K. Doe on his first visit to the United States. It's especially fitting that we should be meeting this year as the United States and Liberia celebrate 120 years of diplomatic relations.
For instance, the U.S. interventions in Iraq and Libya were driven in part by concerns over oil and regional stability. Although population control was not the pretext in those cases, the broader U.S. policy framework, as seen in NSSM 200, reflects a willingness to protect its economic interests by any means necessary. Although not openly stated in NSSM 200, military action remains a tool in the U.S. arsenal to protect its access to resources or influence in regions where instability threatens its interests. If economic measures, population control, and diplomatic efforts fail, war has historically been an option the U.S. considers.
To disarm Iraq. In October 2000, the president of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, announced they would no longer be selling oil in US dollars, only in euros, which on the surface is an innocent change. The big deal is that Iraq has the 5th largest petroleum reserves in the world, and in the 2000s, it had become the world's 5th largest oil producer. So when Saddam Hussein decided to start selling oil in euros instead of dollars, the US wasn't too happy. By February 2003, he has sold over 3 billion barrels of oil for 26 billion euros. A month later, the US invaded Iraq, and rest is history. American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
Now, let's delve into the broader implications of U.S. imperial power as reflected in NSSM 200. The memorandum reflects a strategy of maintaining U.S. economic dominance and political power by managing the development trajectories of resource-rich developing countries, by controlling population growth, and by extension, potential instability in these countries. The U.S. aimed to maintain a form of imperial control, even if not overtly colonial. The growing populations of developing countries, especially in Africa and Asia, represent potential challenges to U.S. global dominance. NSSM 200 can be seen as a policy tool for ensuring that these countries do not grow into geopolitical or economic threats. In conclusion, NSSM 200 exemplifies how population control has been intertwined with U.S. economic and geopolitical strategies. While the memorandum advocates non-military methods like economic pressure, family planning, and birth control, it operates within a broader framework of protecting U.S. access to resources and global power. If these non-coercive methods fail, history suggests the U.S. has shown a willingness to intervene militarily, as seen in Iraq, Libya, and other nations when its economic and strategic interests are at risk. Therefore, the extent to which the U.S. will go includes everything from economic influence and population control to potentially military intervention. In summary, NSSM 200 was part of a broader strategy aimed at maintaining U.S. dominance in a changing global landscape, where population growth in developing countries could destabilize resource flows and challenge American interests. Population control is one of the tools, but the memorandum reflects a wider strategy to protect U.S. imperial power, which may include a range of measures from economic pressure to military intervention.
Hey, now that you heard and have a reasonable explanation on what the NSSM 200 actually means, it's a national security document. What it actually means and was put into policy and is the policy of the United States right now today. Now that you have an understanding, you can better visualize some of the problems we are having here in our homeland. It's up to you to share this video. It's up to you to talk about it. It's up to you to comment on it. And it's up to you to like it, because that'll give it power. And be committed to it. It means everything it's saying. We as Africans, I don't care where we are, the only friends we have is among ourselves. I'm not saying that nobody else likes us or cares about us, but we need to care about ourselves. And it's very, very important that we start uniting and listening to things that we had never heard before. Even some of you Americans have never heard it, especially those here in Africa and in other parts of the world, people that are African that it would concern. These things we're hearing about wars, abortion, famine, all of them have been developed to work against us. It's something that has been scripted and planned. And we need to stand and do something about it. It's time for us to make a stand. You said, Janetta, what can I do? Spread the word, be informed, do some research, get to know. I remember a time when I used to think that I was blessed by God because I was put on a slave ship and brought to the United States, because look at what I have. I didn't know that what I have was from what we had. It belonged to us. What they're building, not only with our body and our energy and our skills and our talent and our lives, they're even taking our materials, the things that God himself gave us. They belong to us. And they're being used against us because we're not awake. So, hey, this is Janetta. And hey, watch me on blackstarradio.com. They have some wonderful programming. And it's not all about this. You'll see music. You'll get the opinions of a lot of people throughout the world. Black Star Radio is growing, and it is internet radio. It is for you to love and understand and comment on and just tune in. I come in on Saturdays around about 8 o'clock Costa Rica time. Look it up, blackstarradio.com. Yeah. So, hey, join me again. I'm still in Tanzania. Come on over here to Africa and get in. Just enjoy yourself. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And the continent belongs to you. Oh, yeah. Hey, this is Janetta, and you're watching Africa Speak.